The manager laughed out loud and pointed as the 94-year-old man's hands shook over the counter. His balance slipped, trembling between his fingers. "Don't play confused," he snapped, raising his voice, mocking the way the old man leaned just to stand. The man whispered an apology, humiliated, as people in line stared, and the threat came hard. "No access, no explanation. Sit down." Then the laughter stopped when the manager leaned in and said quietly, close enough that only the old man could hear, "You think anyone's going to believe you over me? Your money's gone, and there's nothing you can do about it." The old man's knees buckled. He grabbed the counter to keep from falling, his breathing shallow and fast. Behind him, 5 people shifted uncomfortably, their eyes on their phones, pretending they hadn't heard. The manager straightened up, adjusting his tie, and turned to the next customer with a smile like nothing had happened. His name was Thomas Garrett, and he was 94 years old. Thomas had been a carpenter his entire working life. He'd built houses, cabinets, furniture, anything people needed and were willing to pay for. He'd started his apprenticeship at 14, working for a man named Mr. Caldwell, who taught him that good work meant straight lines, tight joints, and no shortcuts. Thomas had carried that lesson for 80 years. He'd worked 6 days a week until he was 73, when his hands started to go numb from the nerve damage. When holding a hammer for more than 20 minutes made his fingers lock up. He'd never made much money. Carpenters didn't, not in small towns. But he'd been careful. He and his wife Ruth had lived modestly in a small house on Oakwood Street. They'd raised 3 children there. Ruth had worked as a seamstress, mending clothes and making dresses for church ladies. Between the 2 of them, they'd managed to save a little. Not much, but enough. Ruth had died 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. It took her in 4 months. The medical bills had taken most of their savings. Thomas had sold their house to pay what was left and moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in a senior living complex on the edge of town. The apartment was small, a bedroom, a kitchenette, a bathroom with grab bars he'd installed himself. But it was clean and quiet and affordable. His rent was $850 a month. Between Social Security and the small pension from the Carpenters Union, Thomas had about $1,300 a month. After rent, utilities, and groceries, he had maybe $200 left. He kept it in his checking account at First National Bank. He'd been banking there for 43 years, since before the building was even built, back when it was Citizens Bank and Trust, and old Mr. Patterson had known every customer by name. Thomas didn't understand online banking. He didn't own a computer. He had a flip phone his daughter had given him 3 years ago, but he only used it to call her once a week. He did his banking the old-fashioned way, in person, with paper slips, asking the teller to check his balance. It was one of the few things he still did for himself, one of the last ways he felt independent. Every month, on the first Tuesday after his checks deposited, Thomas walked to the bank. It was 4 blocks from his apartment. The walk took him nearly 30 minutes now, his pace slow and unsteady, his cane tapping against the sidewalk. He'd stopped twice to catch his breath, sitting on benches that the city had installed years ago. When he reached the bank, he'd go inside, wait in line, and ask the teller to print his balance. He liked seeing the numbers on paper. It made them real. But 3 months ago, something had changed. Thomas had gone to the bank on his usual Tuesday. He'd waited in line, reached the teller, a young woman named Ashley who was always kind to him, and asked for his balance. Ashley had typed into her computer, then frowned. "Mr. Garrett, it looks like there's been some activity on your account. Let me get my manager." Thomas had felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "What kind of activity?" "I'm not sure." Let me just get Mr. Voss." She disappeared into the back. A few minutes later, a man in his early 40s had emerged. He wore a dark suit, his hair slicked back, his smile professional and empty. His name tag said, Derek Voss, branch manager. He gestured for Thomas to follow him to his office, a small glass-walled room near the back of the bank. Thomas had sat down in the chair across from Derek's desk, his cane resting against his leg. Derek had pulled up Thomas's account on his computer, studied it for a moment, then looked at Thomas with that same empty smile. "Mr. Garrett, it looks like there have been some transfers out of your account over the past 2 months." Thomas's chest tightened. "Transfers? I didn't authorize any transfers." "Well, according to our records, you did. See?" Derek had turned his monitor so Thomas could see it. There were lines of text, numbers, dates. Thomas squinted at the screen, but the font was too small, the screen too bright. He couldn't make sense of it. "I don't understand. What does this mean?" "It means you transferred money out of your checking account. $3,000 total. 500 here, 800 there, spread out over 6 weeks. Thomas's voice shook. "I didn't transfer anything. I don't even know how to do that." Derek's smile had tightened. "Mr. Garrett, these transfers were authorized with your account information, your password, your security answers. If you didn't do it, then someone else has access to your account. But I didn't give anyone access. I don't even use a computer." Derek had leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "Well, someone did. And unfortunately, once the transfers are complete, there's not much we can do. You should probably file a police report." Thomas's hands had started shaking. "But that's all the money I have. I need that money. How am I supposed to pay my rent?" Derek's expression hadn't changed. "I understand this is difficult, Mr. Garrett, but bank policy is clear. We're not liable for unauthorized transfers if they were made using your account credentials." "But I didn't give anyone my credentials." "Then someone must have stolen them." Thomas had left the bank that day in a daze. He'd walked the 4 blocks back to his apartment, his mind spinning, his chest tight with panic. $3,000. Gone. He didn't have $3,000 to lose. That was months of savings, money he'd set aside for emergencies, for prescriptions, for the inevitable day when something broke and he couldn't fix it himself. He'd called his daughter that night. Her name was Linda. She lived 2 hours away, had 3 teenagers and a full-time job managing a grocery store. She'd listened to his story, her voice shifting from concern to anger. "Dad, you need to go back to the bank. Demand to see records. Demand to know where the money went." I tried. The manager said I had to file a police report. "Then file one. Do you want me to come down there?" Thomas had hesitated. He didn't want to be a burden. "No, I can handle it." But he couldn't handle it. Over the next 2 weeks, he'd gone to the police station, filed a report with an officer who'd seemed sympathetic, but ultimately told him that these cases were hard to solve, especially if the transfers had gone to overseas accounts. He'd gone back to the bank twice, asking for more information, for transaction records, for anything that might help. Each time, Derek Voss had given him the same polite brush-off. "We're investigating internally, Mr. Garrett. These things take time." Meanwhile, Thomas's rent was due. He didn't have it. He'd called the apartment manager, a woman named Mrs. Chen, who'd always been fair with him. She'd given him a 2-week extension, but after that, she said, she'd have no choice but to start eviction proceedings. Thomas had started skipping meals to save money. He'd stopped taking his blood pressure medication because he couldn't afford the refill. He'd pawned his wedding ring. Ruth's matching band, the one he'd worn for 68 years, for $200. It had broken something in him. Handing it over to the man behind the counter, watching him weigh it like it was just metal. And then, this morning, Thomas had received a letter from the bank. It said his account had been flagged for suspicious activity and was being temporarily frozen pending an investigation. It said he would not have access to his funds until the investigation was complete, which could take up to 90 days. Thomas had read the letter 3 times, sitting at his small kitchen table, his hands shaking so badly the paper rattled. 90 days. He didn't have 90 days. He didn't have 9 days. His rent was due in 3. He'd put on his coat, picked up his cane, and walked to the bank. It was a Thursday morning, just after 10. The walk felt longer than usual. His hip hurt, his breathing was labored. But he had to go. He had to make them understand. The bank was busy when he arrived. There were 7 people in line ahead of him. Thomas waited, leaning heavily on his cane, his legs aching. It took 25 minutes to reach the counter. The teller was Ashley, the kind young woman. She smiled when she saw him. "Hi, Mr. Garrett. How can I help you today?" Thomas pulled the letter from his pocket and placed it on the counter. "I received this. It says my account is frozen. But I need access to my money. I have to pay my rent." Ashley read the letter, her smile fading. "Oh, let me get Mr. Voss for you." Thomas's stomach sank. "Can't you help me?" "I'm sorry, Mr. Garrett. Account freezes have to be handled by management." She disappeared into the back again. Thomas waited, aware of the people in line behind him, their impatience palpable. After a few minutes, Derek Voss emerged. He didn't invite Thomas to his office this time. He stood on the other side of the counter, his arms crossed, his expression annoyed. "Mr. Garrett, I see you received our letter. I need access to my account. I have to pay my rent. As the letter states, your account is frozen pending investigation. But I need that money. It's my Social Security. It's how I live." Derek's voice was loud enough for the people in line to hear. "Mr. Garrett, your account showed fraudulent activity. We have to investigate. That's standard procedure." "But I didn't do anything wrong. Someone stole from me, and now you're punishing me for it." Derek leaned on the counter, his voice dripping with condescension. "Sir, with all due respect, you're 94 years old. You probably gave your information to someone without realizing it. Maybe a phone scam. Maybe a phishing email. I don't use email. Well, somehow your information was compromised, and until we figure out how, we can't release your funds." Thomas's voice rose, just slightly. "I need that money. I can't pay my rent without it." Derek straightened up, his patience clearly exhausted. He laughed, a short, sharp sound that carried across the bank. He pointed at Thomas, his finger jabbing the air. "Don't play confused. You're not the first person to come in here claiming they don't know what happened to their money." He raised his voice, mocking the way Thomas leaned on his cane just to stand. "You probably forgot you transferred it yourself, and now you're trying to get us to give you more." Thomas's face went hot. The people in line were staring now. He could feel their eyes on him. He whispered, "I'm not lying. I didn't transfer anything." "Sure you didn't." Derek's voice was full of scorn. "Look, Mr. Garrett, I don't have time for this. Your account is frozen. You'll get a call when the investigation is complete. Until then, there's nothing I can do. Now please step aside. There are other customers waiting." Thomas stood there, his hands shaking, his balanced slip still clutched in his fingers. The paper trembled visibly. Derek pointed at the chairs near the window. "Sit down over there if you need to rest. But you need to move out of the line." Thomas tried to speak, but his throat was too tight. He whispered, "I'm sorry." He didn't even know why he was apologizing. He just felt the weight of their stares, the humiliation of being scolded like a child. And the words came automatically. Derek turned to the next customer, a woman in her 50s, and his voice shifted instantly to something warm and professional. "How can I help you today, ma'am?" Thomas stepped out of line. He tried to walk toward the chairs, but his legs weren't working right. His vision blurred. He stumbled, caught himself on a nearby column. A security guard, a young man in his 20s, approached. "Sir, are you okay?" Thomas nodded, not trusting his voice. The guard helped him to one of the chairs by the window. Thomas sat down heavily, his cane across his lap, his breathing ragged. He sat there for a long time, watching people come and go, watching Derek Voss smile and laugh with customers like nothing had happened. Finally, Derek walked over to where Thomas was sitting. He glanced around to make sure no one was close enough to hear, then leaned down, his face inches from Thomas's ear. His voice was quiet, venomous. "You think anyone's going to believe you over me? Your money's gone, and there's nothing you can do about it." Thomas's knees buckled even though he was already sitting. His hands gripped the arms of the chair. Derek straightened up, adjusted his tie, and walked away. Thomas sat there, his chest heaving, tears running down his weathered face. He felt like he was drowning. He didn't know that the woman who'd been standing behind him in line had heard everything. Her name was Sharon Keller, and she was 57 years old. She worked as a fraud investigator for the State Attorney General's office. She'd been on her lunch break, depositing a check, when she'd witnessed the entire exchange. And she'd seen something in Derek Voss's behavior that set off every alarm she had. Sharon didn't approach Thomas right away. She finished her transaction, then went outside and made a phone call. She called her office, spoke to her supervisor, explained what she'd seen. Her supervisor told her to document everything and keep an eye on the situation. Sharon went back inside and sat in the waiting area, a few chairs away from Thomas. She watched him sit there, crying silently, and felt her anger building. After about 20 minutes, Thomas stood up slowly and made his way to the door. Sharon followed him outside. "Sir? Excuse me, sir?" Thomas turned, his eyes red and wet. "Yes?" Sharon introduced herself, showed him her credentials. "I was in the bank just now. I heard what happened. Can we talk?" Thomas looked at her, confused and exhausted. "About what?" "About your account. About what that manager said to you." They sat on a bench outside the bank. Sharon asked Thomas to tell her everything, from the beginning, every detail he could remember. Thomas did. His voice shook, but he got through it. When he finished, Sharon was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mr. Garrett, I think you've been a victim of embezzlement." Thomas blinked. "What?" "I think someone at the bank has been stealing from customer accounts, and I think Derek Voss knows about it. Maybe he's involved. I need to investigate this, but I need your permission." "Will it get my money back?" "I can't promise that, but I can promise I'll find out what happened." Thomas nodded. "Do whatever you need to do." Sharon went back to her office that afternoon and opened a formal investigation. She subpoenaed First National Bank's internal records, specifically transactions related to Thomas's account. What she found was worse than she'd expected. Over the past 18 months, Derek Voss had been systematically siphoning money from elderly customers' accounts. Small amounts, 500 here, 800 there, spread out over time to avoid detection. He'd been targeting customers who didn't use online banking, who came in person, who were less likely to notice discrepancies immediately. He'd transfer the money to shell accounts he'd set up using fake business names, then move it again to personal accounts held under his wife's maiden name. He'd stolen from 11 different customers, a total of $47,000. Thomas's $3,000 was just one piece of it. And when customers started noticing and complaining, Derek had either gaslit them into thinking they'd made the transfers themselves, or he'd freeze their accounts and claim it was under investigation, hoping they'd give up or forget. Sharon compiled her evidence and took it to the district attorney. The DA reviewed it, his face darkening with every page. This is criminal. We need to move fast before he destroys evidence. They arrested Derek Voss 3 days later. It was a Tuesday morning. He was at work in his glass-walled office when 2 detectives walked in. They arrested him in front of the entire branch. The charges were embezzlement, fraud, and elder abuse. Derek's face had gone white. He'd started shouting about his rights, about a mistake, about harassment. They cuffed him anyway. The bank's corporate office immediately launched its own internal investigation. They brought in forensic accountants who confirmed what Sharon had found. They identified the 11 victims, including Thomas, and began the process of restitution. They fired Derek Voss and referred the case to federal prosecutors for additional charges. Thomas didn't know any of this yet. He was in his apartment, 3 days past his rent deadline, waiting for the eviction notice he knew was coming. He'd stopped answering his phone because he couldn't bear to hear his daughter's voice, couldn't bear to tell her how bad things had gotten. He'd been living on crackers and canned soup. He'd been sleeping in his recliner because lying down made him think too much. Then there was a knock on his door. Thomas opened it slowly. Sharon Keller was standing there, a folder in her hands and a smile on her face. "Mr. Garrett, can I come in?" Thomas let her in. They sat at his small kitchen table. Sharon opened the folder. "We arrested Derek Voss. He's been charged with embezzlement and fraud. He stole from you and 10 other people. We have all the evidence." Thomas's hands started shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear. Did he admit it? Not yet. But he will. The evidence is overwhelming. Sharon pulled out another piece of paper. "The bank is issuing full restitution to all victims. You'll be getting your $3,000 back. It should be in your account by the end of the week." Thomas stared at her. Then he put his face in his hands and cried. Not quiet tears this time. Deep, shaking sobs that came from somewhere he'd been holding tight for months. Sharon reached across the table and put her hand over his. "You're going to be okay, Mr. Garrett." The money was deposited into Thomas's account 4 days later. He went to the bank, a different branch this time, and verified it. He paid his rent. He bought groceries. He refilled his prescriptions. And then he went to the pawn shop and bought back his wedding ring. It cost him $250, $50 more than they'd given him. But he didn't care. He slipped it back on his finger, and for the first time in months, he felt like himself again. The case against Derek Voss went to trial 8 months later. Thomas was called to testify. He sat in the witness box, his hands folded in his lap, and told the jury what had happened. He described the transfers he never authorized, the way Derek had mocked him, the words Derek had whispered. "Your money's gone, and there's nothing you can do about it." The defense attorney tried to suggest that Thomas was confused, that he'd simply forgotten making the transfers. But Sharon had the bank's internal records. She had emails where Derek had discussed problem customers. She had transaction logs showing the pattern. The evidence was damning. Derek Voss was found guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay full restitution to all victims, plus damages. The judge's words were sharp and unforgiving. You exploited the most vulnerable members of our community. You stole from people who trusted you. You betrayed your position and your responsibility. And when confronted, you mocked and humiliated your victims instead of showing an ounce of remorse. Derek's wife filed for divorce before he even started his sentence. His career was over, his reputation destroyed. The judge's final statement to him was simple. You chose greed over decency. Now you'll live with the consequences. Thomas didn't attend the sentencing. He'd said everything he needed to say during the trial. But Sharon called him afterward to tell him the outcome. Thomas thanked her, his voice thick with emotion. You saved my life. If you hadn't been there that day, I don't know what would have happened to me. You would have survived, Mr. Garrett. You're stronger than you think. Maybe, but I wouldn't have made it alone. The story made local news. Several outlets covered the case, highlighting the exploitation of elderly banking customers. First, National Bank issued a public apology and implemented new safeguards, including mandatory oversight of all accounts belonging to customers over 75 and regular audits of employee transactions. They offered Thomas a settlement beyond the restitution, $20,000 for his suffering and humiliation. Thomas accepted it. He put half in savings and used the other half to pay for things he'd been putting off. Dental work, new glasses, a more reliable phone. But the most significant change was smaller, quieter. Thomas started going to a senior center near his apartment. He'd never been before, had always thought of himself as someone who didn't need that kind of thing. But after everything that had happened, after feeling so isolated and helpless, he realized he didn't want to be alone anymore. At the center, he met other veterans, other widowers, other people who understood what it was like to be old in a world that didn't have much patience for you. He started playing cards on Tuesday afternoons. He joined a woodworking group and taught younger seniors how to make dovetail joints, how to sand with the grain, how to finish a piece so it would last. His hands still shook, but they could still create. One afternoon, about a year after the trial, Thomas was at the senior center working on a small jewelry box when a woman approached him. She was in her 80s, thin and frail with white hair and kind eyes. Her name was Margaret. "Are you Thomas Garrett?" she asked. "Yes." "I saw you on the news about what that banker did to you." Her voice dropped. "Something similar happened to me. Different bank, but the same thing. Someone was taking money from my account. I didn't know what to do. But I saw your story, and it made me realize I wasn't crazy. I got a lawyer. We got my money back." Thomas set down his sandpaper. "I'm glad. I'm really glad. I wanted to thank you for speaking up, for not being ashamed. You helped me." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "You don't need to thank me." "Yes, I do." Margaret smiled. "We have to look out for each other. Nobody else is going to." Thomas thought about that a lot in the months that followed. About how one person's courage could create a ripple, could give someone else permission to stand up, to demand better, to refuse to be invisible. He thought about Derek Voss, about the cruelty in his voice, the contempt in his eyes. And he thought about Sharon Keller, about the way she'd followed him outside, about how she'd believed him when no one else had. Thomas lived another 3 years after the trial. He spent them surrounded by people, His daughter visited more often. His grandchildren called him regularly. His friends at the senior center became like family. He died peacefully in his sleep at 97, his wedding ring on his finger, his small apartment paid for, his dignity intact. At his funeral, Sharon Keller gave a short speech. She talked about the day she'd seen him in the bank, humiliated and crying. She talked about how easy it would have been to look away, to assume someone else would help, to decide it wasn't her problem. But Thomas deserved better than that, she said. And the moment I realized what was happening, I knew I had to act. Because if we don't stand up for the people who built this world, who sacrificed for us, who deserve to live their final years with dignity and peace, then what kind of people are we? The room was silent. Then someone started clapping. Then another person. Soon the entire room was applauding, not for Sharon, but for Thomas. For the man who'd worked his whole life, who'd loved deeply, who'd been exploited and humiliated, and who'd still found the strength to stand up and demand justice. And in a courtroom 3 states away, in a file marked "closed," was a transcript of a trial. In it, a judge's voice, clear and unforgiving. You exploited the vulnerable. You mocked those who trusted you. You believed you were untouchable. You were wrong. The words echoed long after Thomas was gone. They echoed in bank training sessions, in fraud prevention seminars, in conversations between adult children and their aging parents about how to protect themselves. They echoed in courtrooms where other predators stood trial, where other judges used Thomas's case as precedent, as proof that exploiting the elderly carried real consequences. And they echoed in the hearts of people who'd felt helpless, who'd been dismissed, who'd been told they didn't matter. Because Thomas's story told them something different. It told them they did matter, that their voices counted, that justice was possible, even when it took everything they had to fight for it. Have you ever watched someone you love get dismissed by the very people who were supposed to help them? Or seen someone in power abuse that power because they thought no one was watching? Drop your story below. You'd be surprised how many people need to hear they're not alone. And if this one hit home, share it. Because the more people know these things happen, the harder it becomes for predators to hide in plain sight.